A'udhu-billahi-minash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In our previous lecture, we were studying the recognition of crisis, and we had discussed a couple of points to study as to what kind of crisis have occurred. We also tried to address a question whether it is really crisis or some very ordinary or short-living happening that has occurred. We discussed many things in that. For example, we said whether it's a systemic crisis, we talked about the system. We then said, does it relate to political scenario, economic field, social walk of life, or anything else? We also studied various things, and last of all, we were talking about the doctrines and various points or various themes which can be exploited by someone, by some adversary, or by a third force to create instability or to create some kind of trouble elsewhere where the interest of that particular party or adversary or actor lies. And those were, we talked about the religion, sectarian themes can be exploited, geographic dispositions can be exploited. We also said it can be linguistic things, and in the whole world, one way or the other, these things have been exploited. There are false statements about the economic disparity also, which keep piling up in the subconscious of the people, and ultimately they come out in a concentrated form and create crisis. ये वो पुरानी थ्योरीज हैं जो एक अरसा से इस कायनात में इंसान एक दूसरे के खिलाफ इस्तेमाल करता रहा है. हमने ये भी बात की कि लिटिल नॉलेज इज डेंजरस नॉलेज, इट्स अ डेंजरस थिंग. जब हमें किसी बात का, किसी चीज का, किसी सब्जेक्ट का पूरा इदराक नहीं होता, हमारे अंदर उसकी डेफिशिएंसीज होती हैं, कम इल्मी होती है, तो हम किसी और की बात को जो बेशक झूठ पर मबनी हो, उसको भी यकीन करने के लिए फौरन तैयार हो जाते हैं. और जब हम तैयार होते हैं तो वी मे स्टार्ट फ्रॉम वन इंडिविजुअल एंड अल्टीमेटली वी मे एंड अप टू फॉर्म अ प्रॉपर प्रेशर ग्रुप और अ group which can become violent and use the innocence of the people. अब ये जब तक अवेयरनेस आती है, जब तक उन मुतल्लिका लोगों को बात समझा पाते हैं आप, उस वक्त तक बड़े दुश्वार कुन हालात पैदा हो जाते हैं, और उन पर काबू पाना, उनको समझना, उस सेट ऑफ सर्कमस्टेंसेस को आल्टर करना, to convert those particular conditions into desired conditions, it really takes time, unless it has been thought much before, much earlier, and proper awareness has been given to the people. ये एक जगह का मसला नहीं है, ये कायनात के बहुत से ममालिक का मसला है, और वहाँ अक्सर यही एक थीम या यही एक डॉक्ट्राइन वायलेंस के लिए, क्राइसिस क्रिएट करने के लिए इस्तेमाल की जाती है। रिमेंबर, डियर स्टूडेंट्स, peace is one thing which is a key to progress, prosperity, normal and happy life at individual as well as at collective level. The word Islam, it means peace, to ensure safety, and that means, in the proper terminology of today, law and order situation. When things happen like this, when certain doctrines are selected, then work is initiated on them, then it is planned how it will be converted into crisis, how these crises will be escalated, how their dimensions will be increased, how will they be made more complicated, more problematic, and more ununderstandable, and ultimately the peace is disturbed. A peace is disturbed to a level that real intervention of the security forces is also required. If you look towards the slide, that's what we call law and order. These are two words. One is law, one is order. Now there's a set order for a society to function normally, and if it functions normally, this probably relates to the systems. You have a sequence of life, you have a set pattern of life anywhere, in any nation, in any country, wherever you are. So that order, if it is disturbed, then the whole mechanics of the activities of the nation is disturbed. On the other hand, if people start disrespecting and violating the law, that creates even more serious situation. Law is nothing but an agreement at conscious level to behave in a unanimously agreed pattern, or in the religion, the code of conduct commanded by the Lord Almighty Allah. When both these things, they get disturbed, the whole life gets disturbed. The whole cycle of life gets disturbed. And when law and order both are disrespected, then obviously the normal activity or normal cycle of the life will cease to exist or operate. आप जिंदगी में अगर इस तरह की सूरत हाल से दो चार हो जाते हैं तो इसके बेशुमार मसाइल जो इससे मुंसलिक होते हैं वो सामने आना शुरू हो जाते हैं। मिसाल के तौर से अगर एक बाज़ार की दुकानें इस खौफ से बंद हो जाएंगी कि वहाँ there are some even remote possibilities of violence, किसी किस्म के कोई अनप्लेजेंट नाखुशगवार वाक़यात वहाँ आ सकते हैं, तो अब बज़ाहिर तो एक बाज़ार आपको बंद नज़र आ रहा है, लेकिन अगर आप गौर से सोचेंगे तो इसमें बेशुमार मसाइल शुरू हो जाते हैं। सबसे पहले वो शॉपकीपर, वो बिजनेस पर्सन जिसका वो शॉप है या मार्केट है या वो सारे लोग जो उस बाजार में हैं, their earning will suffer at the first hand. Number two, see the number of employees working on those shops, in those markets. They'll be afraid So obviously, if the shops are closed, what are they going to come for? And usually, they are not very well-to-do people. उनका रोजगार मुतासर होगा. अब अगर उनका रोजगार मुतासर हुआ, that's another dimension of this problem. इन्हीं दुकानों को सप्लाई करने के लिए बेशुमार ऐसी जगह हैं, स्टोर्स हैं या होलसेल मार्केट्स हैं जहां से आप इनको तरसील करते हैं सामान. That will stop. Now once that stops, that owner is also affected. It's not only that owner. Just see how much transport is required to come from the industry to the wholesale and then to the retailer. वो ट्रांसपोर्ट पे जितने लोग एम्प्लॉयड हैं, they will also suffer. This transport has to use the fuel. So probably they'll not be requiring fuel if they don't have to move. They're afraid of it. So how many people have gone jobless or they become victims of this particular situation and the life ceased to exist? On the other hand, there's another reaction. जो लोग घर में बैठे हैं, अगर उस दिन उनको ताज़ा सब्जी नहीं मिली, या घर में पकाने के लिए गोश्त नहीं मिला, या मेडिसिन्स नहीं मिली, या डेली रूटीन की इस्तेमाल की चीज़ें नहीं मिली, obviously there are going to be problems. We don't see the things at the grassroots level, but if you see the things at grassroots level, then it's easy to identify the crisis and see their magnitude and see their volume and see their severity as well. कि एक बहुत इमोशनल बात है कि if an infant doesn't get milk, which usually is drawn from a shop. Now this is a very, very sensitive issue, at least at one level, and once it gets accumulated, then it forms a real crisis. So law and order is another thing, and we have to see it's the law and order situation in the process of recognition of crisis. अब आप ये भी देख लीजिए कि ये जो लॉ एंड ऑर्डर की हमने बात की, ये ज़रूरी नहीं होता कि एक्सीडेंटली होता है या वैसे ही होता है. It may be a very well planned affair by some vested interest, by some people, by some foreign forces, by some other indirect influences which are not known to us. So in order to manage the crisis successfully, we have to recognize, first of all, from where the thing has been initiated. So that's as far as the law and order is concerned. Let's see the next slide. It says extreme climatic conditions. It says extreme climatic conditions. What does it mean? It's not very difficult to understand. In fact, today the world has gone very fast and modern in the weather forecast. In the developed countries, there are channels, radio channels, television channels, government departments, which keep giving the weather forecast and keep giving the alarms round the clock, 24 hours. And people plan their activities according to the weather forecast, because the snow-bound areas, maybe, or the areas which are usually struck by the tornadoes, or where the fast wind blows, or where there is danger of floods, etc. If they are not given proper information, probably you must have seen many a times the situations occur when tremendous traffic is just caught up by blockade of a road or a path or an entrance by heavy snowfall. So if that's known beforehand, probably we will not move out. There will be some measures also, which people themselves will take at certain points because they live there and they know what's likely to happen where. Weathers sometimes really create tremendous problem for the normal life. If the degree of temperature goes beyond 25 degrees centigrade in the European countries, it becomes unbearable for the people. In our own northern areas, if those people, they come here and they are told to face 55 degrees centigrade of our deserts, it's simply impossible for them. If a man living there in the desert is sent to Skardu or beyond, Dansum, where round the clock the snowfall is there and temperature goes as minus 70 degrees. So they'll not be able to survive because their body is not acclimatized. They don't have that kind of dress. They are not trained for such like circumstances. So when it's extreme hot or it's extreme cold or the wind, storm blows unusually, it leaves lot many problems. उससे क्या होता है? तूफान तुंदो तेज अगर आएगा और उसका वक्फा भी तवील होगा तो आपकी बिजली का निज़ाम भी मुतासर होगा, आपके टेलीफोन का निज़ाम भी मुतासर होगा, आपके केबल नेटवर्क्स का निज़ाम भी मुतासर होगा, दफ्तरों में आने जाने का वो लोग जो इन सारी चीज़ों को मेंटेन करते हैं, जो इनको मैनेज करते हैं, खुद उनका उस जगह पे पहुंचना जहां उनकी ज़रूरत है वो दुश्वार हो जाएगा। ट्रैफिक के मसाइल क्रिएट होंगे, हादसात हो सकते हैं, एटसेट्रा। सो lot many things are related to the climatic conditions also, and one must not trust the weather or the climatic conditions. They can change at any time. They change as the pollution or radiation or various activities which are taking place in the universe, they are all affecting on our weather also, and many countries are now experiencing very great change, a big change in their climatic conditions. Remember, you are living somewhere, so according to that set of climatic conditions, you have designed your life, you have created the infrastructure for that, and you are prepared to take on any problem which is likely to come up and which usually comes up, and you are not prepared for it, so it doesn't create awe and shock for you. It doesn't create any panic for you. It's accepted to be a normal thing. But aggravated things, of course, can create very serious problems, and ultimately they can assume the shape of crisis. So, in the recognition of crisis, do not leave this very innocent factor which appears to be. ये बड़ा एक मासूम सा काज या सबब या वजह हमें लगती है, लेकिन इससे पैदा शुदा क्राइसिस बहुत सारे मसाइल पैदा करती हैं, और ये वो क्राइसिस हैं जिनके लिए हम पहले से तैयार भी हो सकते हैं. In fact, to a very big level or to a very reasonable level, we can preempt the crisis. उनके नमूदार होने से पहले हम अपनी जो मनसूबाबंदी करते हैं उसमें इतना कुछ हम कर लेते हैं कि once we are ready to operate, then it's not a difficult job for us. हम उस पे आएंगे, how can we plan that and how can we prepare ourselves to preempt the crisis which can occur, which are likely to occur, or the things that have potential for creating any kind of crisis. That's as far as the extreme climatic conditions are concerned. The next point is unusual global happening. Today, no country or no nation is living in isolation. आज की दुनिया में कोई कौम या कोई मुल्क अलग थलग होके ना जिंदगी गुजार सकता है ना गुजार रहा है। वो बैनुल अक़वामी हालात से पैवस्त है, जुड़ा हुआ है, मुंसलिक है, इवन अगेंस्ट इट्स डिज़ायर्स। ना चाहते हुए भी आप बहुत सी चीज़ों में बैनुल अक़वामी हालात से मुंसलिक हैं। पहले ऐसा नहीं था। जब ऐसा नहीं था तो वो जो एक मुहावरा है कि इग्नोरेंस इज़ ब्लेसिंग, उसका कुछ ना कुछ रिमोट कंट्रीज़ को फ़ायदा होता था। लेकिन आज कायनात में कहीं कोई ऐसा वाक़या पेश आता है जिससे हम ये महसूस करते हैं कि इसका स्पिल ओवर या इसका ओवरफ्लो या इसके असरात हम तक पहुंच सकते हैं, तो हम हिफ्ज़े मा तक़द्दुम के तौर पर ऐसी इक़दामात करना शुरू कर देते हैं जो हमारे लिए खुद बहरान का बायस बन सकते हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, वेरी सिंपल एग्जाम्पल्स आई विल कोट। Very few countries of the world have oil, petrol, lubrication resources to fulfill their own requirements. Otherwise, to most of the countries, fuel is provided by those countries that are producing fuel. Now, it has to be shipped from somewhere, and it has to take that much time to reach you. But once something goes wrong at the point from where your main supply is to arrive, the media will take no time to flash the breaking news on the television screen. And no sooner this news reaches the person who is a user or who is a supplier, he gets very conscious about it. And lust, remember, never goes out of the heart or out of the mind. लालच एक ऐसी चीज़ है जो किसी ना किसी सूरत हमारे साथ चिमटा रहता है। तो जब ऐसी खबर मिलेगी तो जो लोकल सप्लायर है, जिसके पास लोकल अथॉरिटी है, वो क्या करेगा? He may decide to make money out of this unfortunate situation. And to make money, he may start not selling that item or sneakily create high rates. अब जब ये फिनोमेना मैग्नीफाई होता जाएगा, बढ़ता जाएगा, तो जो लोग पेट्रोल एक मुकर्ररा रेट के मुताबिक ख़रीद रहे थे, उनको ही अगर एक बढ़ी हुई कॉस्ट पे जो खुद उस सप्लायर ने बढ़ा दी है, उस पे मिलेगा, डेफिनेटली देयर विल बी अ रिएक्शन. दैट रिएक्शन कैन अज्यूम द शेप ऑफ क्राइसिस. ये एक हमने इसकी सूरत देखी. आलमी मंडी में अगर सोना महंगा हो गया है तो फिर हम उसकी तरफ भागना शुरू कर देते हैं. अगर दुनिया के किसी मुल्क में कोई बहुत बड़ा हादसा हो गया है It may be some very severe, of very high magnitude, violent incident which collapses the system for some time. Its spillover, it reaches everyone on this universe. And one has to be very, very conscious at that time. उस वक्त आपने recognize ये करना है कि ये जो global occurrence हुई है, इसके क्या असरात हो सकते हैं, हमारे इस ऊपर इसके क्या असरात हो सकते हैं, और ये किस किस्म की क्राइसिस या बहरान पैदा कर सकते हैं. Likely, we have to recognize कि इस particular situation में how are we going to be affected, हम इसमें कैसे मुतासिर होंगे. Now it's important that we should not try to plan our things when the balloon goes up. जब वो कोई काम हो चुका है या कोई वाक़या रूनुमा हो चुका है, बल्कि हमें उससे पहले ही ऐसी चीज़ों के लिए ज़हनी तौर पे भी, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के लिहाज से भी, मनसूबाबंदी के लिहाज से भी, उन वसाइल के लिहाज से भी जो हमें चाहिए होते हैं, पहले से तैयार होना चाहिए. एंड वी मस्ट हैव अ वेरी वेल प्रेयर्ड, very well designed, rehearsed and implementable plan at our disposal. तो फिर हम इससे नबुर्द आज़मा हो सकेंगे. अगर हम ये सोचते रहें कि कोई बात नहीं, ये जंग तो फलां जगह हो रही है, it's not going to affect us, well, we are mistaken. Let me tell you, it will affect us in one way or the other. The severity or the intensity may be lesser or it may be more. Only the degree of intensity will vary, but its effects will definitely be there. So, पूरी दुनिया में बहुत सारे ऐसे वाक़यात रूनुमा हुए जिन्होंने पूरी दुनिया को अपनी लपेट में ले लिया. One of the toughest example was the tsunami incident, which took toll of human life, loss of property, dislocating millions of people, destroying hutments and settlements, and the business of fishery, and so many other things. So it affected the life of many adjacent countries very severely, and it affected the world in an overall scenario. Of course, farther you are or less related you are to the area, lesser affected you are, but definitely you are affected. So that's as far as the global happening is concerned. It can be geared, it can be created, it can be planned by somebody, or it may be a natural calamity or a natural disaster. The next point, it says business. Now, very interestingly, as much as the business is being talked today, nothing is being talked about. Business is dominating each and everything. As the industrialization keeps going ahead, and as the commercialism keeps going ahead, business has become the strongest fiber of our society. Now, it's not promised by the prevailing circumstances or the contemporary international scenario at any time that business will stay stable. It's also very important to know that there's a great, fast, competitive race among the nations, multinational companies, among the business owners to sell their commodities as much, as faster, as costly as possible. So, tremendous amount of investments have been made in business, probably the maximum. The business has surrounded the human life. And today, if you want to create problems for somebody, create the business disbalances, what will happen? It will bring so much of disappointment, so much of inactivity, so much of artificial sufferings taken as real sufferings. So many victims will be created indirectly, that the quantum of this kind of problem will assume the shape of crisis. ये बिजनेस या कारोबार ही अब जिंदगी की सबसे बड़ी हकीकत बन गया है और जिंदगी पर हावी है, इंसानी जिंदगी पर। जाहिर है जूं जूं ये दुनिया सिमट गई है तो उसमें कारोबार में मज़ीद इजाफा हुआ है और उस इजाफे से मुताल्लिक हज़ारहा लोगों की वाबस्तगी भी है। अब एक कारोबार एक सिंपल और सादा सा काम नहीं रहा, उसके रास्ते में हज़ारहा चीज़ें आती हैं और जहां ह्यूमन बीइंग को सफरिंग्स का, इनजस्टिस का, विक्टिमाइजेशन का, महरूमी का एहसास होता है, वहाँ वो रिएक्ट करता है और उसने अब रिएक्ट करने के अंदाज भी बहुत से सीख लिए हैं। So, you should try to recognize कि are these crises pertaining to business? If you recognize them, that they are pertaining to business, then probably you have to move in another direction. You have to change your certain pre-planned actions. You have to have a separate and a set and a specific kind of input into this crisis in order to have better output. So it's not difficult to understand. We have already partially talked about it. And the business means business. And if it's disturbed, then the society is disturbed. We'll not talk in more greater details as it's very clearly understandable by all of us. Let's come to the next point. It says terrorism. Well, this word is a very frightening word today. And unfortunately, the world has fell prey to this terrorism. What's terrorism? Terrorism is a violent act which is planned, and its main key is to kill one and scare 1 million. And it is aimed at creating disbalances in some society, in some area, in some country. And it has got 100,000 shapes and types, techniques and methods. And probably the whole universe, hardly anybody is left who hasn't experienced terrorism, though it's a human instinct and it has been happening ever since creation of the human being. But in today's fast-moving world, this has become a very common trend or a common source to create problems in some society. Now, this will ultimately create law and order situation. Now, remember, terrorism, as I said, it has got many shapes, but it's a violent act. And whenever this violent act is planned or it is to be initiated somewhere, it's not an easy job and it's not a day's job. वो लोग जो आपको दहशतगर्दी का निशाना बनाना चाहते हैं या किसी कौम को या किसी टारगेट को, वो एक दिन में ये काम नहीं करते। इस पे साल हा साल की बाकायदा मंसूबाबंदी, बाकायदा तरबियत, वसाइल की रसाई और बहम पहुंचाना, ये बातें इतनी माइन्यूट, इतनी बारीक तफसील तक तय की जाती हैं और इनकी मंसूबाबंदी की जाती है कि उसका इल्म भी होना बहुत दुश्वार होता है। आपको शायद इस बात से हैरत हो कि बहुत से ऐसे मौक़े हैं जहां दो नस्लों को लड़ाने के लिए या दो मुख्तलिफ ज़बानें बोलने वालों को, एक ही कौम में रहने वाले, एक ही मुल्क में रहने वाले लोगों को आपस में लड़ाने के लिए, या दो मुख्तलिफ जुग्राफियाई शनाख्तों के लोगों को आपस में लड़ाने के लिए जो लोग मंसूबाबंदी करते रहे, इन दोनों पार्टीज़ को वो एक ही जगह से हथियार देते रहे। और आज भी ये टेक्निक मौजूद है। टेररिज्म का द बिगेस्ट थिंग इन टेररिज्म इज दैट अ टारगेट इज सिलेक्टेड which will attract maximum possible sympathies of that particular society. इसमें ऐसा हदफ तलाश करते हैं वो लोग जिसके साथ खुद ब खुद ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा इंसानी हमदर्दियाँ वाबस्ता हो जाती हैं, और जितनी इंसानी हमदर्दियाँ ज़्यादा वाबस्ता होंगी, that's a peak of emotional climax. And once you reach an emotional climax, then you react abnormally. And you think that you are trying to render your services, or you are trying to fulfill at least a moral responsibility by agitating, by coming on the roads, by brickbatting the people, by burning the vehicles to whom it may concern. You try to burn the shops. यानी इस सूरत में ये ऐसी खतरनाक चीज़ है कि जो इंसानी रवैया सामने आता है वो बहुत वायलेंट होता है। Now, when we come to the planning side, we'll talk about it. Probably it's a very, very difficult situation to handle in the crisis, because you cannot even imagine of, if you haven't done your very good homework, very proper planning in detail, and a constant watch on the activities going on around you, then it will be difficult for you to assess that situation. It leaves, first of all, it starts the shock. It comes with an utter surprise, और उसमें अक्सर लोगों को, जिसको आप कहते हैं हवास बाख्ता हो जाना, वो एक फितरती सी बात होती है। और हवास बाख्तगी में जो रद्द अमल सामने आता है वो किसी भी सतह का एक शदीद बहरान हो सकता है। It can be a real severe crisis which have the germs of escalation also, because it has been planned that way. The second thing about this terrorism is, since 1980s, ever since, the media, and particularly the visual screen, has assumed a dominant role in our life. It has become a vehicle of the terrorist. उसका एम भी उस वक्त अचीव हो जाता है जब उसके किए हुए काम को टेलीविजन स्क्रीन फौरी तौर से तफसील से दिखा देती है. So his aim to kill one and scare millions is completed. And if 1 million are scared, their uncertainty prevails in their mind. एक बेयकीनी की सूरत हाल पैदा हो जाती है. So everything will be in trouble. Law and order situation, business, normal life, peace, prosperity, mental satisfaction, सारा कुछ दरहम बरहम हो जाता है. So we have to recognize many things. You know, it's sometimes it's difficult even to differentiate between whether some particular crisis or some particular event was really an act of terrorism or it was something else. But if it is confirmed this is an act of terrorism, then it requires much serious management, much flawless management. And media is the most important factor and role in this particular way. And we'll talk about it when we come to the management. How should we deal with the media? How should we have our own communication plan? What should we take care of? What should go out? How should we speak to people? How should we issue statements? How should we talk and give our opinion, etc., etc.? We don't have to make any enemies en route to management of crisis. If we create enemies or any disliking is created, then we are not good managers of crisis. Now, terrorism, as I said, it can have 101 types of shapes. And we'll not go into those details, but remember the 4-5 things which I mentioned. कि ये डॉक्ट्राइन्स भी इस्तेमाल होती हैं इसमें, थीम्स भी इस्तेमाल होती हैं इसमें, और मोटिवेशन बेसिकली और इग्नोरेंस का फ़ायदा उठाता है वो शख्स जो ऐसी हरकत की मनसूबाबंदी करता है. सो awareness probably is the first answer even before it's occurring. So we have to recognize and then link it and then start initiating the measures. That is as far as the terrorism is concerned. I've given you a very brief note on that. It can be local, it can be at national level, it can be at transnational level, it can be at global level. And it has got many types. But we'll not, that's not our subject, to go into those details. We have to manage the things, manage the crisis. Let's go and see what's the next point. It says industrial espionage. आज जबकि दुनिया सनत की दुनिया बन चुकी है, कारखाने की दुनिया बन चुकी है, इंडस्ट्री की दुनिया बन चुकी है. So there are countries that are running only on their industry. Lucky we are that we are tremendously supported by our agriculture fields, by the God-given gifts, His bounties and blessings that we have in our beloved homeland, walking parallel with the industry. Food, water, fodder, fruits, vegetables, etc., etc. We have with us enough, but industry is also there. But as I said, there are countries in the world which are only running on the industry. If their industry is damaged, or some kind of negative or violent activity or some kind of trouble is created in those industries, then it creates very, very serious crisis. It can be accidental and it can be planned also. The famous incident of Chernobyl in Russia, that has recorded a great history as far as the industrial espionage is concerned. It may not be an espionage, but the very leakage, it created tremendous problems. In one of our neighboring countries also, the nuclear leakage, it took toll of lives and it created a very serious crisis, and its effects are being felt even today. And it has happened in many other countries. You can think of anything that can be created to make the industry, render it dysfunctional and create problems. For example, if an industry is expanding over, let's say, 10 kilometers and it's surrounded by the populated areas, and it's preparing chemicals or acids or alkalis for that matter, or anything that can harm the human life and the surroundings. If that is put on fire, or some problem is created in the electricity, or some kind of leakage is created, to manage such a huge structure, its building, its systems, its fallout, and its likely damage. If the wind starts blowing towards the west, let's say, then the areas or the settlements located in the west are at a great danger, and you can't change the direction of the winds blowing at that time. There can be many kinds of espionage activities or acts that can be implemented to create trouble or to render a particular system or area or government or a nation unable to perform successfully well. And once that damage has occurred, now remember that it has far-reaching effects also. The drama or the game or the situation will not end once the fire has been extinguished, once people have been saved, let's say, with some casualties. But the damage that has occurred, who is going to put it once again on road, make it functional, from where the resources will come, those who are employed in that, the damage that has occurred to the owner or the corporate sector, whatever it is, how it is to be made up. These things, although a man or a person who is not affected, he'll read the news for 3-4 days, it will appear in the media and we will forget it, but the wearer knows where the shoe pinches. It will leave so much of backlog behind, which will keep crawling with maybe the future crisis, and it may be even linked or hijacked with the crisis which are in being, or it may be a very well planned act to be connected with a series of acts. So this is also one of the considerations when we talk about the possibilities or recognition of the crisis. Let's briefly touch another thing. It's kidnapping. That's also not a fashion, but it has been planned, and it has now come up in the world as an organized act of violence to create trouble in certain areas. किसी ऐसी जगह पे जहां we have tremendous political affiliations, we have, let's say, blind religious or sectarian faith, we have some institution or some personality for which a lot of people have got attachments. If any personality, which is the central person, is kidnapped, it will not be for ransom. But that will also create, it will hurt the feelings of that population, of that target, of those people. And of course, one should expect a blind reaction from them. And that blind reaction, it can take any shape, any route, or any direction. And that's a crisis. So we have to see, we should not see any kidnap as crisis for sure shot, or initiation of crisis for sure shot. It may be for ransom, it may be for some other thing, it may be due to some enmity, it may be due to some feudal activities, some feud or something, but it can be aiming at creating crisis for a particular person or government or area or some business or some other political or strategic motive. That's as far as the kidnapping is concerned. And the last point on this slide that we are going to study today is disaster in the neighborhood. What's disaster? Now, disaster is an occurrence that brings classic and tremendous loss and threat to life and property. Like I just quoted the example of tsunami. So that was a huge classic disaster which created threats for many adjacent countries. So, if in your neighboring country something like that happen, it may be a very, very serious or gigantic level of flood, and the flow is towards your land, unfortunately. It does have the seeds of crisis. There can be some problems pertaining to a particular incident in the world. It may be in the shape of agitations which have rendered or colossal loss and which have rendered very serious threat to that nation. It can spread, its spillover can be there. If there's an earthquake near you, God forbid, at least one can get mentally prepared and recognize, yes, this can happen to us also. So, it can be political disputes, can be religious or sectarian disputes which have created disasters, or it may be natural disaster, or it may be business-related disaster, or any other shape. Whatever happens in the neighborhood, you should be watchful and you should try to recognize what that exactly aims at and how can it affect us and how can we feel its effects if it affects us. Will it create a crisis situation for us, or will it just pass by as an occurrence, as an event, as an incident? So you have to be watchful of that also. Well, recognition of the crisis and to decide one question, that is it really crisis or not? If we are misled, that we read a non-critical situation as a critical situation, even then we are the sufferers and we are not good managers. And if we commit the same mistake the other way, again we are at loss and we are not good crisis managers. Today, continuing with the same lecture as to recognition of crisis, we have talked about a couple of more factors, among which it was to keep a watch on the neighborhood. It could be law and order situation, any kidnapping, specific target-oriented kidnapping incident. It could be any sudden happening. It could be an act of terrorism. It could be industrial espionage, etc. All these things fall in the prompters of crisis. And we have to recognize and establish why it's important, because we have to fight this war with appropriate weapons, and we'll only be able to have appropriate weapons if we know the situation in crystal clear defined form. तो अजीज तालिब इल्मों, बहरान अब इंसानी जिंदगी का एक हिस्सा है, आर्जी भी, किसी और का पैदा करदा भी और फितरती तौर पर भी, और इससे शुतरमुर्ग की तरह आंखें बंद करके या रेत में अपना सर छुपा के खामोश हो जाना तहफ़्फ़ुज़ नहीं, बल्कि आगही, इसके इंतज़ामात, इसकी बाकायदा मनसूबाबंदी और इससे निमटना बहुत ज़रूरी है, और इसके बगैर कोई चाराकार नहीं है. Nothing will come from the skies to take us out of any crisis. We have to make an effort. With all that, we'll end our lecture today. That recognition of crisis is absolutely essential and indispensable in order to fight and manage the crisis successfully. May Allah grant you the wisdom, skill, and competence to recognize the crisis and manage them successfully in an ideal manner. And I'm sure you will work hard and acquire that skill. With all this, Khuda Hafiz. Inshallah, we'll meet in the next lecture. Thank you.